I grew up wearing my stepbrother's hand-me-downs, eating his leftovers, and being told to be grateful. Now I own a beach house. My father walked in, looked around, and said, "This would be perfect for your brother's family." I just smiled and made one call. My name's Cassandra. I grew up in a home where my mother's son had the new clothes, the hot meals, the warm bed, while I wore his cast-offs and scraped his plate clean and was told to be grateful. Years later, I finally had something of my own, a beach house. My father walked in, looked around, and said, "This would be perfect for your brother's family." I just smiled and made one phone call. Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below and tell me what would you have done. The late afternoon sun spilled across the wide plank floors of my beach house, catching the pale blue of the ocean through the big windows. I just poured myself a cup of tea when I saw his Chevy pull into the driveway. No call, no text, just Fletcher, my father, stepping out like he owned the place. He didn't bother knocking. The screen door creaked open, and there he was, scanning the room with that same measuring look he'd worn my whole life. "Nice spot you've got here," he said, his tone halfway between compliment and appraisal. His gaze swept over the high ceilings, the polished counters, the view. This would be perfect for Brennan and his growing family. You know, plenty of room for kids to run around. The way he said it wasn't a suggestion. It was the start of a negotiation I hadn't agreed to have. I just sipped my tea, watching him drift from one end of the living room to the other. My fingers tightened around the mug. It was the same old rhythm, Fletcher dropping in, deciding what I should do with what's mine, like it was all just on loan until he found a better use for it. And just like that, I was 8 years old again. Back then, our house smelled of meatloaf and floor polish, the kind of ordinary you could taste. Brennan got a brand new bike for his birthday, red with shiny chrome and a little bell that rang clear as a bird. Mine came 3 months later, his old one, green paint chipped down to the metal. The seat taped over where it had split. At dinner, Brennan's plate was always full first. 2 big scoops of mashed potatoes, thick slices of roast beef. Mine got what was left after the platters had gone around once. "Be grateful, Cassandra," Mom would say, not even looking at me. "You have a roof over your head." Those words still scraped like grit under my skin. Back in the present, Fletcher had wandered into the kitchen, running a hand along the edge of the island like he was already picturing someone else's family here. "You don't really need a place this size, do you?" he asked almost casually. "A single woman?" "Well, it's a lot of space to keep up." I leaned against the counter, my voice steady. "I managed just fine." He gave a small chuckle as if I'd just confirmed his point. "Brennan's lease is up next month. It's hard for a man to raise a family in a cramped rental. This house would solve a lot." Every word was polite enough on the surface, but the undercurrent was the same one I'd heard since I could remember. "Your needs are secondary." He moved through the hallway, peeking into rooms without asking, as if taking inventory. I trailed behind, the smell of salt air drifting in from the open back door. Each step stirred up more of those old memories, holidays where my presents were practical things. School trips I couldn't go on because Brennan needs new cleats, conversations where my voice didn't count. Yet here I was standing in a house I'd bought myself. No co-signers, no help from family, just my work, my choices, my signature on the deed. But to Fletcher, it was still a resource to be reassigned. When we reached the front door again, he turned back with that half-smile I'd grown to mistrust. "I'll talk to your mother about this," he said, like the matter was already settled. Then he stepped out into the fading light and headed for his truck. I closed the door slowly, pressing my palm against the wood, feeling the solid weight of it under my hand. My other hand gripped the keys in my pocket until the metal edges dug into my skin. That's when I realized my childhood wasn't over. My father still thought he could rewrite it. And if he wanted to start the same old game again, he had no idea I'd been playing my own for years. The morning light was soft, spilling across the kitchen counters as the smell of fresh coffee drifted up. I stood at the sink, the ocean winking through the big windows. For a moment, it was just me, the gulls, and the quiet rhythm of the waves. Then the phone rang. Cassandra. My mother's voice came sharp, skipping right past hello. I just spoke with your father. Brennan's wife is expecting, and they need more space. That house of yours, it's too much for one person. It makes sense you'd help them out. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue before answering. Help them out by giving them my home? Don't twist my words, she said, even though that was exactly what she'd meant. Family helps family. Your brother's starting a new chapter. Don't be selfish. I could picture her in the kitchen back at the old house in Springfield, cordless phone in one hand, the other flipping through mail. She wasn't really reading. Same tone, same push. I'm fine here, Mom, I said evenly, and I'm not looking to move. She sighed, long and theatrical. Well, think about what's right. It's not just about you. Then she hung up without a goodbye. I set the phone down, and not 20 minutes later it rang again. Aunt Rosalie this time, all syrup and sighs. Sweetheart, I hear you've got that big place all to yourself. Wouldn't it be wonderful for the little one to grow up by the sea? By little one, she meant the baby my brother's wife was carrying, the one she'd only just found out about yesterday, apparently before I did. I'm not renting it out, I said, keeping my voice calm. Oh no, not rent. A gift, she said, like that would make it sound better. You've always been so generous. I ended the call quickly, but within the hour, Aunt Dolores tried her hand at the same pitch. This time it was family duty and helping your brother get a start in life. I didn't need to ask where they got their lines from. The script had Dad's fingerprints all over it. It was like being back in my 20s, sitting in my first apartment in Portland. Tiny secondhand furniture, barely enough to scrape by. I'd just gotten my first steady paycheck from the insurance office when Mom and Dad came over, Brennan in tow looking sheepish. He just needs a little help to get on his feet, Dad had said. You're doing well enough now. Lend him a few thousand. He'll pay you back. He never did. That little help meant I spent months juggling bills, eating pasta with butter for dinner, skipping nights out because I couldn't afford gas. And yet when the holidays rolled around, Brennan was the one opening shiny boxes and telling stories about working hard for what you have. Back in my kitchen now, the memory made my jaw tighten. 3 calls in one morning, each one pressing the same guilt buttons they'd been pushing for decades. I turned the phone face down on the counter and just listened to the waves, to my own breathing. I'd caved before, sure. I'd told myself it was easier to give in than to fight, but every time it left me smaller. Not this time. I pulled a notepad from the drawer, flipped to a clean page, and started listing the property details. Parcel number, deed reference, date of purchase. I underlined my name in ink twice. Then I jotted down the names of a few people who'd be useful if things got messy. Finally, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice before someone answered. Hey, I said, my tone light, almost casual. Got a minute? I think I'm going to need your help. They thought they'd corner me with family guilt. But this time, I wasn't planning to escape. I was planning to end the game. And to end it, I had to go back to where it all started. The coastal breeze faded behind me as I steered inland, trading salt air for the dry, dusty smell of farmland. The road narrowed, flanked by stretches of brown grass and half-collapsed barns. I'd made this drive hundreds of times as a kid, back when I had no say in where I was going or who was calling the shots. Now, every mile closer to that house felt like walking into a trap with my eyes wide open. The closer I got, the more the past pressed in. I could almost hear the creak of the old swing Dad refused to fix for me, even while building Brennan a brand new treehouse. That imbalance had been the wallpaper of my childhood, always there, impossible to ignore once you saw the pattern. When I finally turned onto the gravel drive, Fletcher was already on the porch, arms folded like a gatekeeper. His stance screamed, "I'm in charge here." The boards under his boots looked like they'd been replaced recently, probably after Brennan mentioned it. "Finally remembered where you came from," he said, mouth curling into that half-smile he reserved for moments when he thought he had the upper hand. Behind him, I caught sight of Margot through the kitchen window, her hand pausing mid-wipe on the counter. Her face was unreadable, neutral, but with the faint stiffness of someone bracing for impact. I parked, stepped out, and kept my voice light. Just passing through. He chuckled like we both knew that wasn't true. Well, you might as well come in. The house smelled exactly the same. Coffee grounds, lemon cleaner, and a faint undertone of old wood. My eyes skimmed over the patched sofa in the living room. I remembered sitting there as a teenager, legs sticking to the fabric in summer, while Brennan sprawled on his brand new leather recliner. The chipped plates in the hutch were still there too, the ones I'd eaten off while Brennan got a matching set in bright, perfect white. I wasn't looking at furniture. I was looking at a scoreboard. Fletcher trailed me into the kitchen. "So, about that beach house," he started, his tone casual like he was talking about the weather. "It's just an idea right now, but you know it'd be the right thing to do." I didn't answer. I let the silence stretch, the hum of the fridge filling the space between us. His voice sharpened. "Before the baby comes, they need a home. You understand that, don't you?" "I understand you've already decided what's best for me," I said, keeping my tone even. That made him pause. His jaw worked like he was chewing over whether to push harder or back off. He chose harder. "You've got more than you need. Your brother, he's starting a family. That's the future." His words hit a familiar chord, and just like that, I was 12 again. I'd been in the hallway out of sight when he told Margot, "She's tough. She can go without. He needs more. He's the future." I hadn't moved for a long time after that, standing there with my hands clenched, realizing that no matter what I did, I'd never be on equal ground in this house. Back in the present, I glanced toward the dining table. That's when I saw them, rolled blueprints, a rough sketch of my beach house layout, and in the top corner, my brother's name scribbled in Dad's handwriting. I didn't touch them. I didn't need to. The image burned itself into my mind. "Thanks for the coffee," I said, even though I hadn't been offered any. I walked to the door, meeting Fletcher's eyes long enough to make sure he saw the steadiness in mine. They thought they were keeping secrets, but they just handed me the proof I needed. And once I had proof, the only question left was how to use it. The drive back to the coast felt shorter than usual, maybe because my mind wouldn't stop running scenarios. By the time the ocean came back into view, my hands had already unclenched from the steering wheel, replaced by that calm, deliberate focus I get when I'm about to make a move. The sun was dropping low when I pulled into the driveway of my beach house. I didn't go inside right away. I sat there with the engine ticking, staring at the weathered shingles and salt-faded paint, and thought about every memory tied to this place, every one of them mine, not theirs. Then I pulled out my phone and called the only person I knew would give me the truth without sugarcoating it. "Melody, it's me. You got time to meet up?" Half an hour later, we were sitting in a little cafe that smelled like fresh cinnamon rolls. She walked in wearing the same kind of easy smile she'd had back in high school, the one that told me she already knew I was in trouble before I even said a word. I laid it out for her, the rolled-up plans on the table at Dad's, my brother's name in the corner. The way Fletcher's tone had shifted from suggestion to certainty. She leaned back, stirring her coffee slowly. "Then if they've got it on paper, they're not just thinking about it. They're moving." I nodded. That's what I figured. Her eyes narrowed, not at me, but at the situation. "You've got one advantage. They think you're still playing catch-up. You're not. If it's yours, you control the timeline. Don't let them set it." The idea had been floating at the edge of my thoughts ever since I'd left that house. Hearing her say it made it feel real. Selling the place myself, ending the game before they even knew the rules had changed. Before I could answer, my phone lit up. "Fletcher." I stepped away from the table but didn't bother lowering my voice. "Hello, Cassandra," he said, using that tone like he was already halfway through the conversation. "We'll be coming out this weekend to look at the place, just giving you a heads up." "We?" "Yes, we," he repeated, drawing it out like it was supposed to mean something obvious. "Saturday morning, clear your schedule." I didn't say yes, I didn't say no. I just let the pause hang until he finally muttered something about being reasonable and hung up. When I turned back, Melody was watching me with that sharp look that always made me feel like I was in the middle of a chess match. "They're making their move," she said. That evening, I found myself sliding into a booth at the old diner on Main Street. Fletcher had invited me, more like ordered me, and I'd agreed because sometimes it's worth seeing what cards someone thinks they're holding. He was already there, menu closed, leaning forward with both elbows on the table. "You know how much the family's done for you," he started, skipping the small talk. "All we're asking is you give a little back. Brennan's got a baby on the way. It's only fair." I folded my hands, meeting his eyes. "Fair is an interesting word, Fletcher. I don't think we've ever agreed on what it means." He tried again, talking about family unity and doing the right thing. Each phrase carefully chosen to sound noble while pushing me toward the outcome he'd already decided. I let him finish, then asked, "Is that your way of saying you're not going to stop until you get what you want?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Across the room, a man in a tailored jacket was pretending to read the menu. The way he glanced up every so often told me he was listening. I didn't know who he was, but Fletcher noticed him too. His jaw tightened, and he abruptly slid out of the booth. Outside, the street lamps had just flickered on. He stopped beside my car. "Think carefully, Cassandra. This isn't just about you." I looked at him for a long moment, then turned and walked away. If they wanted a fight over this house, I'd give them one they'd never forget. And the first move was mine to make. I woke before sunrise, the sky still the color of slate, with that kind of clarity that comes when you've already made your decision. No second guessing, no pacing around in circles, just the quiet certainty of knowing exactly what needs to be done. I put on coffee, grabbed my notepad, and started making calls. Melody picked up on the second ring. "Then it's early. You okay?" "Better than okay," I told her. "I'm ready to sell." There was a pause. Then the smile in her voice came through. "So, you've decided to play your own game." "I'm done waiting for theirs," I said. "You mentioned once you knew someone who could handle an off-market deal. No noise, no gossip." "Yeah, a broker who works with high-profile clients who don't want their names in the paper. He's quiet, efficient, and not cheap." "I don't care about cheap," I replied. "Set it up for today." By the time the sun broke the horizon, I'd already showered, dressed, and gathered every document that proved my ownership. The air had that sharp salt bite to it as I locked the front door and slid into my car. The road into town was nearly empty, just fishing boats heading out and a few early joggers. My mind ran through each step like I was lining up dominoes. One nudge and everything would fall into place. The broker's office was tucked behind a row of shops. Nothing flashy, just a frosted glass door with his name in small gold letters. Inside, it smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. He was a tall man in his 60s, with the kind of calm demeanor you only get from years of seeing deals rise and fall. "Ms. Chambers," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "Melody tells me you're looking for speed and discretion." "That's right," I said, sliding the folder of documents onto his desk. "I want the property sold immediately. No open houses, no chatter in town. Once the papers are signed, it's final. No room for anyone to interfere." He flipped through the papers, nodding slowly. "You realize a move this quick will raise questions. Especially in a small coastal town, people notice." "They can notice all they want," I said evenly. "What they won't do is stop it." He studied me for a moment, then gave a small approving smile. "In that case, I have a buyer in mind. Cash, ready to move, wants waterfront property with privacy, he's already vetted. If you're serious, we can meet in an hour." "I'm serious." An hour later, I was shaking hands with Declan, a man whose name I'd never heard before, but whose eyes told me he'd made more than a few high-stakes purchases in his life. He was polite, almost understated, dressed in a dark jacket that looked like it cost more than most people's cars. "I understand you value privacy," he said. "Enough to put it in writing," I replied. "The sale stays between us, the broker, and my attorney. No one else knows. not even my family, until the ink is dry. He didn't flinch. Then we'll make that part of the agreement. The negotiations moved fast, the kind of pace that said neither of us had time to waste. Within 2 hours, the contract was drawn up, every clause airtight. The price was fair, more than fair, actually, and in cash. No delays, no financing hiccups. When the pen was in my hand, I didn't hesitate. My signature was steady, my heartbeat calm. In that moment, the house wasn't theirs to scheme over anymore. It wasn't even mine. It was already out of reach, locked down beyond their grasp. Walking out of the office, I felt lighter. The late afternoon sun threw a golden sheen across the water, the air warm but edged with the promise of evening. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe without measuring the inhale. But as I crossed the street toward my car, I saw it. Fletcher's Ford parked by the pier. He was leaning against the hood, arms folded, watching the water like a man with all the time in the world. I didn't change my pace. If he'd been waiting for me, he could keep waiting. By the time they knocked on my door, the house wouldn't even be mine anymore. And when that knock came, it wasn't gentle. It rattled the glass in the front door, 3 hard thuds like someone meant to break it down. I stood still for a second, coffee mug in hand, knowing exactly who it was before I even moved. I set the mug down, squared my shoulders, and opened the door. Fletcher stood there broad as the frame with Brennan at his side. They were shoulder to shoulder, blocking the morning light, their expressions carved from the same cold stone. Fletcher didn't say hello. He pushed past me like the house belonged to him, his boots loud on the hardwood. Brennan lingered a step behind, taking his time, letting his eyes roam over the place with a half smirk. "Nice setup," he said, like it was an insult. I closed the door slowly, locking it behind me. "What do you want?" Fletcher turned in the middle of the living room, holding a thick manila envelope. He didn't hand it to me. He tossed it onto the coffee table like throwing down a gauntlet. Inside, I could see the edge of a document, my own signature printed clear as day, the sale contract. "You think you can just dump family property without so much as a word to me?" His voice was low, but it carried the kind of weight that could shake walls. I didn't answer right away. I picked up the envelope, slid the contract out, and laid it flat like I hadn't already memorized every line. "It's done. The papers are signed, and the money's already in escrow." Fletcher stepped closer. "You're going to call that buyer and tell him it's off." "No," I said simply. Brennan's smirk dropped into a sneer. "This was supposed to be for my kids. Do you even think about anyone but yourself? What kind of aunt just hands their future away to some stranger?" I met his eyes. The kind who's tired of being treated like a holding pen for everyone else's dreams. Fletcher's jaw tightened. He leaned down until his face was inches from mine. "You're making a mistake you can't take back." I straightened up, refusing to give ground. "I made sure of that. The contract is binding, irreversible. I had 2 attorneys look it over before I signed." His fist slammed into the wall beside my head. The thud echoed through the room, but I didn't flinch. "You think hiding behind paperwork is going to save you?" he growled. "It's not hiding," I said quietly. "It's making sure you can't do to me what you've done before." He pulled his hand back, shaking out the sting, his face darkening. "You want to fight? You'll get one. I'll drag your name through this town until no one will look you in the eye." "You do that," I told him, "and maybe I'll start talking about the things you'd rather no one heard." That stopped him just for a beat, long enough for Brennan to shift uncomfortably. Fletcher straightened, giving me one last measuring look. "You'll regret crossing blood, girl." They turned and left, the door banging shut behind them. I stood in the quiet, listening to their footsteps fade, then locked the door again. My hand stayed on the bolt a moment longer than necessary. The air in the room felt heavier, like their anger had seeped into the walls. I went to pick up my coffee, but before I could take a sip, my phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number, 1 line of text. "They're not done. Watch your back." I stared at it for a long second, then set the phone down. If this was a war, they'd just declared it out loud, and I already knew my next move. I stayed at the kitchen table, the steam from my coffee curling upward in slow ribbons, a pen balanced in my hand. The contract sat off to the side like a silent reminder that there was no going back. I pulled a notepad toward me and started listing out every angle I could use, people to talk to, documents to dig up, anything that would put me one step ahead before Fletcher made his next move. The phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. I almost let it go to voicemail, but the name flashing on the screen made me pick up. "Cassie, what's going on?" The voice was sharp, the kind that already knew the answer but wanted to hear it confirmed. "I just came from the market. Fletcher's running his mouth all over town, saying you cheated them out of the house, forged signatures, the whole works." I pressed my thumb into the notepad, leaving a dent in the paper. "Of course he is." "He's poisoning the well before you can even speak," she went on. "And you know people here. They'll nod along just to avoid trouble." I closed my eyes for a beat, steadying my voice. "Then I guess it's time they heard the other side." There was a pause on her end. "Then meet me at the corner bean in 20. We need to talk face to face." I grabbed my jacket, shoved the notepad into my bag, and locked the door behind me. The cafe was quiet for late morning, the air warm with the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls. Melody was already in the corner booth, her hands wrapped around a mug like she was holding onto something solid. She slid a plate toward me before I could even sit. "You're going to want this," she said. I took a sip of the coffee she'd ordered for me. "All right, what do you know?" She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "One of my cousins knows Declan, the guy who bought the place, and from what I hear, he's not looking to flip it. He's planning to hold on to it, maybe even fix it up himself." I set my cup down slowly, letting that sink in. "So, the sale's not moving anywhere fast." "Exactly," she said. "Which means you've got time. But time to get ahead of whatever Fletcher's planning. Time to make your case if it comes to that." A knot I hadn't realized was sitting in my chest started to loosen. "That changes everything." Her eyes narrowed like she was testing me. "It changes nothing if you keep hiding. You've been quiet for too long, Cassandra. They've walked all over you because you let them. Now you need to let them see who they're messing with." I met her stare. She wasn't wrong. "What are you offering?" I asked. She smiled. Not a friendly smile, but the kind that meant business. "I'll stand with you publicly, even if Fletcher's circle turns on me. I'm done watching them grind you down." It was more than I'd expected from anyone lately. "You sure you want to get dragged into this mess?" "I'm already in it," she said simply. "Might as well pick a side." We spent the next hour going over what I had: old letters from my grandfather, receipts for repairs I'd paid for out of pocket, the tax bills I'd covered when Fletcher claimed he forgot. Each piece felt like fitting a brick into a wall I could hide behind if the storm hit. By the time we pushed our chairs back, I had a plan. Gather everything into one file, keep it ready, and if he tried to smear me again, the truth would come out in one loud, undeniable wave. The sun was sharp as I stepped out of the cafe, tucking the folder of notes under my arm. Across the street, Brennan leaned against a lamppost, hands in his pockets like he had nowhere better to be. When he saw me, he straightened and lifted his phone, speaking into it without breaking eye contact. His mouth curved into a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. I kept walking, but the back of my neck prickled. They weren't just waiting for me to slip, they were pushing me toward the edge. But they'd forgotten. I'd learned to climb back up. That thought stayed with me as I crossed Main Street, the crisp morning air stinging my cheeks. I was heading toward the bakery when something caught my eye on the community bulletin board outside the library. A sheet of paper printed in bold black letters was pinned right in the middle. "Warning: be cautious of dealings with CM, known for taking advantage of family and neighbors. Protect your property." The initials might as well have been my full name spelled out. No signature, but the wording was exactly the kind of poison Fletcher would drip. My stomach clenched, but I forced myself to stand there and read it twice. People passed behind me, some slowing just enough to glance at me, then at the paper before walking faster. I tore it down, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Evidence, not shame. As I rounded the corner toward the hardware store, I spotted them. Fletcher leaning against the doorframe, Brennan at his side like an eager shadow. Well, if it isn't our local thief, Fletcher's voice carried across the sidewalk, sharp and deliberate. I stopped a few feet away, refusing to step closer. Morning to you, too. You've got some nerve showing your face here after what you pulled, he said, raising his voice so the two men loading lumber into a truck would hear. Brennan lifted his phone, holding it at an angle just right to capture me head to toe. Smile, sis. This one's going on the highlight reel. You mean the smear reel? I shot back. Fletcher shook his head like he was disappointed. Stealing from family. You always were ungrateful. We gave you everything and you pay us back by selling off what wasn't yours to sell. That's not how it happened, and you know it. I kept my tone even, but my pulse was pounding. One of the bystanders shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. Another whispered something to her friend and walked off. The balance was shifting. I could feel the weight of opinion tilting against me. I turned on my heel and walked away, not because his words stung, but because standing there any longer would give him the scene he wanted. By the time I got home, Melody's car was already in my driveway. She was on the porch with her laptop bag slung over one shoulder. Get inside, she said the moment I unlocked the door. We don't have much time before his version becomes the version. We spread out at my kitchen table, pulling out everything I'd kept. Old receipts for repairs, tax bills in my name, even photos of the house before I'd sunk my savings into fixing it up. You've got to put this out there, Melody said, scrolling through the files. Not a rant, not a fight, just facts. Let people connect the dots themselves. I hesitated. I'd spent years avoiding public fights with them, believing silence kept me safe. But this wasn't safety anymore. This was open season on my name. All right, I said finally. Let's do it. We drafted a short, clear post for the community Facebook page. No accusations, no insults, just a simple note. For those who've asked, here's the truth about the property sale, followed by scans of the receipts and letters from my grandfather naming me sole inheritor. When I clicked post, my hands felt strangely steady. The first few comments came within minutes. Some were sharp. Why air this online? But others pushed back hard at Fletcher's narrative. A man I barely knew wrote, I remember her paying the back taxes when no one else would. Another woman said, funny how her brother always seems to land on his feet while she does the work. By evening, the thread had over 100 comments. Some defended me outright. Some told stories about Fletcher and Brennan playing favorites for years. Others tried to stir the pot, but at least now there was another side being heard. I was starting to believe the tide might turn when a new notification popped up. A private message from an account with no profile picture. You think you've won? Check the courthouse tomorrow. I stared at it for a long moment, the glow of the screen casting my reflection back at me. I'd stepped onto the battlefield, and they were already loading their next weapon. I just didn't know it would come with legal letterhead. The next morning, Melody picked me up early. Neither of us spoke much on the drive to the courthouse in Burlington. We didn't need to. The air between us was thick with unspoken strategy. Inside, the hallways smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Fletcher and Brennan were already there, leaning against the wall like they owned the place. A thick folder rested in Fletcher's hands, and the smirk he gave me was the same one he'd worn since I was a child, the kind that said he thought he'd already won. Well, if it isn't our little property hustler, he said, just loud enough to carry. Brennan chuckled, eyes darting to the people nearby. Don't worry, sis. This won't take long. I walked past them without slowing, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Melody pressed a hand briefly to my back, steadying, not guiding. We took our seats at the table across from Fletcher's lawyer, a man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. When the judge called us in, Fletcher's attorney launched into his performance. He claimed the beach house was family property and had been improperly transferred to me. Then came the props, framed photos of Brennan's kids playing in the sand, holiday dinners on the deck, all designed to paint a picture of belonging. This property has always been part of the family's shared assets, the lawyer concluded smoothly. We request immediate transfer of title to my client, Mr. Brennan Conway. I didn't flinch. Instead, I slid a sealed envelope across the table to my attorney. She opened it, pulling out the original purchase contracts, every renovation receipt down to the nails, and most importantly, the notarized copy of my grandfather's will, naming me sole owner of the beach house. She rose, approached the bench, and laid each page before the judge like pieces of a puzzle. Your Honor, these documents establish my client's undisputed ownership. There is no legal basis for the petition before you today. The judge leaned back, reading silently. When she finally looked up, her voice was firm. Mr. Conway, filing claims without factual or legal merit wastes this court's time and resources. Do not do it again. A murmur rippled through the room. Someone in the back, I recognized him as a local reporter, snapped a photo, his camera's click slicing through the silence. Fletcher's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Brennan's smirk had vanished. Outside, the cold air hit my face like a reset button. That's when I saw Declan standing by the steps, hands in his coat pockets. Cassandra, he greeted warmly, I'm glad that went your way. I smiled, still catching my breath. I didn't expect to see you here. I was in town for a meeting, and I wanted to thank you again for selling me the house. He paused, studying my face. I've been working on a coastal development project. Would you consider partnering with me? It would secure your financial future for years to come. For a moment, I was too stunned to answer. After months of fighting to keep what was mine, here was an opportunity to build something entirely new. Yes, I said finally. I'd like that. Fletcher brushed past us on his way down the steps. This isn't over, he muttered, not meeting my eyes. But Brennan lagged behind, glancing at me once. No smirk, no words, before following our father. Melody and I drove back to the beach house in silence. Not the tense kind this time, but the kind that comes after a storm has passed. Later, I sat on the deck as the sun dipped low, painting the water gold. The sound of the tide was steady like a heartbeat I could trust. I thought about everything. The house, the fights, the names they'd called me. And I realized something. Love without respect isn't love at all. It's control dressed up as care. I didn't need them to see my worth. I'd built a life where their absence was the gift.